I used to think that good intentions were enough to cover the damage they caused. That if you meant well, even if the thing you did was wrong, the people you loved would understand eventually, because love was supposed to be bigger than mistakes. I don't think that anymore. What my wife and I did to our oldest son is not a complicated story. It is a short, ugly one. We took $65,000 that his grandfathers had left specifically for him, and we gave it to his younger brother to pay off debts we were too ashamed to tell Sebastian about. We convinced ourselves we would replace every dollar before he ever found out. We told each other it was for the family. We believed that story long enough to sign the transfer papers. Sebastian found out on a Tuesday in March, 7 months after we moved the money. He had called the bank about a down payment on a house. He and his wife Erin had been saving for 3 years. They had a daughter Delia, who was almost 5. They wanted a backyard, a school district with good ratings, something stable. Sebastian had always been methodical that way. He made lists, he planned, he accounted for every variable, except the one that was his own parents. He drove to our house that evening, without calling first. I was in the kitchen when I heard his truck pull up. Nora was at the dining room table. She looked at me the way she had been looking at me for 7 months, like she was waiting for something to happen that neither of us knew how to stop. I heard Sebastian's footsteps on the porch, then the door. He didn't yell. That was the thing I remember most. I had braced for yelling. I had rehearsed how to handle yelling, because in my mind, an argument was something you could manage. You absorbed the volume, you apologized, you promised to make it right, you got through it. Sebastian just stood in the doorway holding his phone. The bank statement pulled up on the screen. And he looked at me for a long time without speaking. Finally, he said, "Tell me I'm reading this wrong." I couldn't. Sick. He looked at Nora. She looked at the table. "Both of you knew," he said. It wasn't a question. I had a speech ready. I'd been constructing it for months without admitting to myself I was doing it. Something about Trevor's situations than we'd let on. Something about how $65,000 in unpaid debt would ruin a 22-year-old's life if the collectors got involved first. Something about how Sebastian was strong. How Sebastian always landed on his feet. How Sebastian would understand once things settled down. I started with "Sit down. Let me explain the whole." "Don't," he said it quietly. "Just final." "Sebastian," Nora's voice cracked, "we were going to tell you." "When?" Well, she didn't answer. "When were you going to tell me?" He looked between us. "Before I called the bank? Before Erin and I lost the house we'd already made an offer on? Before I spent 3 years assuming that money was still there, because you told me it was safe?" I said. "Your grandfather left that account in both our names. There was no legal reason we couldn't." "I know what the account said." His voice was still even. That evenness was the scariest thing in the room. "I'm asking you why you decided to use it." I told him about Trevor's debt. The food truck that had failed. The credit cards Trevor had maxed out when the business collapsed. The collections notices arriving at our address, because Trevor had listed us as a contact. The civil lawsuit from a supplier. I told him we hadn't wanted to worry him. I told him Trevor had nowhere else to turn. Sebastian listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You took my grandfather's money and gave it to Trevor. We are going to pay it back. We already talked to a financial advisor about a structured." "On what timeline?" 3 years, maybe 4. I needed it now. His voice finally shifted. Not loud but raw. "Erin and I lost that house. We were under contract. I had to call my wife and tell her that the money her grandfather-in-law left specifically for us wasn't there anymore. And I didn't have an explanation that didn't make this family sound like." He stopped. Took a breath. "What did Trevor say when you told him?" Nora and I exchanged a look that Sebastian caught immediately. "He doesn't know where the money came from," I said. The silence that followed was the kind that changes a room permanently. "You didn't even tell him." Sebastian's voice was almost calm. "So he doesn't have to feel guilty. You just took it and let me carry it." "We didn't want Trevor to feel." "I don't care what you didn't want Trevor to feel." He picked up his phone from where he'd set it on the counter. "You never did. That's the whole story, isn't it? You never wanted Trevor to feel anything hard. That's been true since we were kids." I started to deny it. Nora said nothing. And something about her silence must have told him that we both already knew he was right. He was. I had known it for years, even while I refused to name it. Trevor was our younger one, charming, scattered, perpetually in some kind of trouble that always seemed just barely manageable if the right people stepped in. We had stepped in so many times I had lost count. A fender bender at 19 that we paid to settle quietly. A college semester he'd failed that we funded a second time, without telling anyone. A security deposit he'd lost through negligence that we replaced. Because we couldn't stand to watch him lose his apartment. We had never asked ourselves what any of that cost. Sebastian was the son you pointed to when someone asked if you'd raised your kids right. He was also the son we kept expecting to absorb the damage, so Trevor wouldn't have to. I'm not going to fight with you, Sebastian said. He was at the door now, and I hadn't seen him move there. I'm not going to call a lawyer over this, even though I probably should. I'm going to go home and tell my wife what happened. And then I'm going to make decisions about what comes next. Sebastian, please, let's just. Don't take this out on Delia. I don't know why I said it like that. Like a warning before anything had happened. He stopped, turned around slowly. Don't, he said. One word, the way he said it made me feel like I had already done something unforgivable just by thinking it. Then he left. I told myself he would call in a day or two. I told myself Sebastian was practical, not impulsive, and that he would come back to us with conditions. A faster repayment schedule. A formal written agreement. An apology from Trevor. All of those things I could work with. He didn't call. After 10 days I tried his cell. Voicemail. I left a careful, measured message. After 2 weeks Nora tried. Voicemail again. After 3 weeks we drove to his apartment. His neighbor told us he'd moved out 2 weeks prior. No forwarding address. Aaron's number had been disconnected. His work email bounced. He was no longer at the engineering firm. We found out when we called, and were politely told he no longer worked there. His social media, what little he'd ever maintained, was gone. He didn't disappear like a man throwing a tantrum. He disappeared like a man who had thought it through. The only person we could reach was Trevor, who had known nothing about any of it. When we told him what we'd done, he went quiet on the phone for a long time. Then he said, "You used Sebastian's inheritance." "We were trying to help you," Nora said. "I didn't ask you to help me with Sebastian's money." He sounded sick. "I never asked you to do that." That was true, he hadn't. We had done it entirely on our own, convinced that Trevor's crisis was more urgent, that Sebastian was more stable, that the math made sense, if you didn't look at it too closely. We had not consulted either of them. We had decided for both. For the first year, we searched. We hired a skip tracing service. That cost us $800 and turned up nothing. We called relatives and old friends. Nora's sister said Sebastian had texted her once to say he was okay, and would be in touch when he was ready. She didn't have a location. She said she wasn't going to push for one. I thought about Delia constantly. She had been almost 5 when Sebastian left. She would have turned 6 somewhere we couldn't reach. Then 7. Then 8. Trevor struggled with the knowledge of what we'd done in ways I hadn't anticipated. He was angrier at us than I'd expected. Which felt both fair and like a strange relief, because at least someone else in the house understood the shape of the mistake. He paid us back $4,000 over the following year, in small irregular installments. Money he could barely spare, as if he thought returning a fraction of it would change something. It didn't. But I didn't tell him to stop. By the second year, life had reorganized itself around the absence. Nora rearranged the photos on the hallway wall. I didn't ask her to. I think she couldn't stand walking past Sebastian's face every morning, knowing what we'd done to the man in it. Delia's birthday was in August. The first year we sent a card to his last known address, knowing it probably wouldn't land. Nothing came back. The second year, we sent one to a P.O. box we'd found connected to what looked like a mail forwarding service. We weren't certain it was his. Nothing. Then in August of the third year, an envelope arrived at our house. No return address. Inside, one printed photograph. Delia, 8 years old, standing beside a school science fair display board grinning at the camera. Missing her left front tooth. Green jacket I didn't recognize. On the back of the photo nothing written. No note. Nora held it without speaking for a very long time. I studied the project board visible over Delia's shoulder. Her name was printed on it, Delia Marsh. Marsh had been Aaron's maiden name. Sebastian's had changed their last name. I turned the photo over and looked at my granddaughter's face, and understood that he had not done it impulsively. He had taken that step deliberately. Not to hide from the world, but to close a door so completely that we could not walk through it uninvited. The fourth year, another photo. Delia on a soccer field, cleats caked in mud, arm around a teammate, taller now. Hair cut shorter. She looked happy in the uncomplicated way kids look happy when they aren't carrying anyone else's weight. The fifth year, the photo included Sebastian for the first time. He was standing behind Delia at what looked like a national park, one hand on her shoulder. He looked different. Leaner. Something easy in his posture that I didn't associate with the man who had lived near us. He looked like someone who had set down something he'd been carrying for a very long time. I sat in the kitchen with that photo, after Nora went to bed and came back to his face, over and over. The Sebastian I remembered had always been slightly braced against Trevor's chaos, Against our far requests, against the quiet exhaustion of being the son, who never needed anything, and therefore never received anything. This version looked like a man who had finally stopped waiting for the next thing to go wrong. That was when I started writing to him. My first letter was 3 pages and explained too much. My second was half a page and said almost nothing. I threw the third away entirely. The fourth I mailed. It said, "Sebastian, I'm not writing to ask for anything. I don't deserve to ask for anything. What we did was wrong. Not complicated, not well-intentioned, not a decision made under pressure that reasonable people would understand. Wrong. We treated your grandfather's gift to you like it was ours to manage. We treated your stability like a resource we could draw from without asking. I am sorry. I don't expect a response." I sent it to the P.O. box. I heard nothing for 6 weeks. Then a letter came. His handwriting. I had to sit down before I opened it. "Dad, I got your letter. You said you're not asking for anything, and I'm choosing to believe that. I need you to understand what you actually took from us, beyond the money. Aaron and I lost that house. We didn't find another in the same school zone for 2 more years. We paid PMI for 18 months, because we came up short on a second down payment. Delia spent 4 years in an apartment, when she should have had a yard. I'm not writing this to make you feel worse. I'm writing it because consequences don't disappear. When the intention behind the damage was love. Don't write back unless something changes. Sebastian." I read that letter maybe 30 times in the weeks that followed. Nora read it and didn't speak for a full day. Then she said quietly, "He's right about every word of it." She was. We both knew it. Something shifted in the house after that letter. Not dramatically, not with a single cathartic conversation that resolved everything. Just a slow and uncomfortable settling into what was actually true. We had spent 20 years managing Trevor's problems. We had spent almost no time asking what that cost Sebastian. We had told ourselves the love was equal, even if the attention wasn't. And Sebastian had been living quietly, with the proof that it wasn't equal at all. Trevor read the letter on a Sunday, and stood at the kitchen counter, holding it for a long time after he finished. He said he'd been thinking about writing to Sebastian himself, telling him the money hadn't been his idea, telling him he was sorry it happened the way it did. I told him I didn't have a direct address. He said he'd figure something out. I don't know if he ever sent anything. I never asked. Some things between two people aren't mine to manage, and I was only just starting to understand what that meant. In the 6th year, Nora had heart surgery. A valve issue that had been developing quietly. She came through it without complication, but those weeks in the hospital, and the long recovery afterward, changed something in both of us in ways that are hard to articulate. When you spend enough hours in a cardiac ward waiting room, you start doing the math on time differently. I wrote to Sebastian again, shorter this time. "Your mother had heart surgery 3 weeks ago. She's recovering. I'm not telling you this to pressure you. I just didn't want you to find out later and feel like we'd hidden it. She loves you. I love you. That's all." He answered in 2 weeks. "Dad, I'm glad she's okay. I hope the recovery goes smoothly, Sebastian." 8 words. Careful. Real. I took them and held them like they were sufficient, because they were what he was willing to give. And I had given up the right to ask for more. The following August, the annual photo arrived, but this time there was something else in the envelope. Delia, now 11, had drawn a picture in crayon, a house with a large tree in the front yard and 2 windows lit up from the inside. At the bottom, in her careful handwriting, "This is our house. I have my own room. Delia." Nora framed it and hung it in the hallway where Sebastian's photo used to be. I didn't ask whether Sebastian had told her to draw it, or whether she had decided on her own. I let it mean exactly as much as it meant, and not one thing more. The call came on a Thursday evening about 8 months later. Number I didn't recognize. I answered expecting a spam call. It was Sebastian. We were both quiet for a moment after I said his name. I could hear what sounded like a kitchen in the background. A faucet running, then shutting off. He said, "I'm not ready for a lot. I want to be upfront about that." "I understand," I said. "Delia has been asking about you and Mom. She was pretty young when we left, but she remembers things. The kitchen, certain smells, I don't know exactly what. She's been asking." My throat tightened. I didn't say anything. "There's a family weekend at her school this spring. Grandparents are invited." He paused. "She asked if she could invite you." I pressed the phone to my ear and waited. "If you come," he continued, "there are things I need to be clear about first. You don't tell Delia the details of what happened. She knows there was a serious problem between us. She doesn't need the specifics. You don't bring Trevor. You don't make the day about reconciliation in front of her, because she's a kid and she shouldn't have to manage everyone's emotions. If it gets to be too much for her. We leave immediately, and without discussion." "Yes," I said, To all of it without hesitation. A brief pause. I'm not promising anything beyond that one day. I know. Another pause longer. Then he said, she drew that picture herself. I didn't suggest it. I couldn't speak for a second. I managed it's on the wall in the hallway. He didn't respond to that. But he didn't end the call either. I said, Sebastian. Yeah. I hadn't planned what came next. I just said it. You were always the easier one to take for granted. You were steady, you handled things. We told ourselves you were fine, because looking closely enough to see, you weren't would have cost us something. I don't know how to fix what that did. I know I can't. But I need you to know that I see it now. The silence lasted long enough that I thought he might have set the phone down. Then he said, I'll send you the details about the weekend. He ended the call. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after. Nora came in from the other room and looked at my face, and I told her, and she sat down at the table and put her face in her hands and didn't make a sound for almost a full minute. The school weekend was in April. We drove 6 hours. Sebastian met us in the parking lot, just him. Aaron standing near the entrance with Delia somewhere inside. He looked older in person than in the photographs, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He wore the same careful neutrality I remembered from that last night in our kitchen. Not hostile, not warm, just measured. He shook my hand, he hugged Nora, quickly with stiffness, but he did it. He said she's excited. She's also nervous, and she doesn't show it in an obvious way. She takes after you, Nora said. He almost smiled. Maybe. When Delia came through the school's front door and saw us, she stopped walking. She was 11, nearly 12, and she had her mother's cheekbones, and her father's way of going completely still when she was processing something. She looked at me, then at Nora, then at her father. Sebastian gave her a small nod. She walked the rest of the way across the parking lot and stopped a few feet away. I crouched slightly. She was still a child even if taller than I'd imagined, and I said, Hi, Delia. She said, Hi, Grandpa. The word landed somewhere behind my sternum. I held myself together, barely. We spent 4 hours at that school. We looked at her science project, which had won second place in the regional competition, and which she explained with the particular intensity of someone who had been waiting for the right audience. We ate lunch at a picnic table outside. Sebastian, Aaron, Delia, Nora, and me. Aaron was carefully polite and said very little, and watched Sebastian's face the way you watch a forecast. You don't entirely trust. Delia talked about soccer season and a book series she was reading, and a teacher who let the class do their Friday reading assignments outside when the weather was good. She did not ask about Trevor. She did not ask about the past. She existed fully in the present, which I suspected was something her father had been deliberate about teaching her. When it was time to leave, Delia hugged Nora without prompting. Then she turned to me and held out her hand formal, like we were completing a transaction. I shook it. She grinned, and it broke the formality completely. You can come to a game sometime, she said. She glanced at Sebastian. Right, Dad? He looked at her, then at me. We'll see how it goes, he said. It was not forgiveness. I understood that clearly. But it was a door left open by a few inches, which was more than I had earned and more than I deserved. On the drive home, Nora slept for most of it. I drove and thought about what Sebastian had said on the phone weeks earlier, about being the easier one to take for granted. I thought about how many times I had handed him a difficult thing and woke assured by how well he handled it, never once asking whether he wanted to handle it at all. He had been carrying our mistakes since he was a child. He had carried them all the way to the other side of the country, and he had put them down not by forgetting them, but by deciding they no longer had the right to define him. Whatever he was choosing to offer us now. Slow, cautious, conditional. He was offering not because we deserved it. He was offering it because his daughter had asked him to. And loving her well meant showing her what it looked like to be something larger than your own pain. Delia drew another picture the following month and mailed it to our house. A soccer field this time, crayon and colored pencil, with a figure in goal and one kicking toward it, and 2 smaller figures standing on the sideline watching. At the bottom of the page in her careful print, this is my game. You weren't there yet, but you can come to the next one. Yet. Nora hung it next to the house drawing. I stood in the hallway looking at both of them for a while. We went to a game in October. We sat on the far end of the bleachers, not close enough to crowd Sebastian's space, close enough for Delia to find us in the stands. She scored her second goal late in the second half, raised both arms, and then turned and waved once, specifically, directly at us, before running back toward her teammates. I waved back and didn't trust myself to say a word. After the game, Sebastian walked over while Aaron and Delia collected their gear. He stood beside me looking out at the field and said, She's been working on that left foot shot for 2 months. It showed, I said. We were quiet. Not the terrible quiet of the kitchen 7 years ago. Just two people standing close enough that the silence wasn't empty. He said. I don't know what this looks like going forward. I want to be honest about that. I know. Some days I'm okay with it, and some days I'm not. I understand. He nodded once. I need you to let me set the pace. Yes, I said, whatever you need. He looked at me then. Something in his face opened, just enough for me to see the cost of what he was doing. Choosing this, repeatedly, when it would have been easier not to. He was not forgiving and forgetting. He was making a decision against his own history. Every single time because the person he was becoming required it of him. Okay, he said. And he went back to his daughter. That was 2 years ago now. We are not a normal family. I don't know if we ever will be. There are gaps in the years between that can't be filled in, and things that didn't get repaired because repair wasn't possible. Trevor and Sebastian have not spoken. That is not a door I have any business trying to open. What we have is this. A drawing or a photo that arrives every August without fail. An occasional phone call, short, careful, genuinely his. A soccer game or school event a few times a year, where we sit in the bleachers and watch a child growing up in spite of everything we put her family through. She knows we exist. She knows her father loves her. She knows that families can cause serious damage, and that coming back from it, when it happens at all, takes longer than anyone expects and looks nothing like the movies. Last month, Delia called our house on her own. It was the first time she'd ever done it. She asked Nora for the lemon bar recipe that she vaguely remembered from when she was small. She said she wasn't sure if she was remembering it right or just imagining it, but she wanted to try making it. Nora sat at the kitchen table after the call and cried for a while. Then, she got out a notepad and wrote the recipe down in her clearest handwriting, and mailed it the next morning. A week later, a photo arrived. Delia standing in what I assume is her kitchen in Oregon, holding up a tray of lemon bars that had come out slightly uneven and perfectly golden. On the back she had written, I remembered right. I put the photo on the mantle. We are not restored. We are not forgiven in the way that word gets used, when people want the story to end cleanly. What we are is this. Still here, still accountable, still learning, at a pace set by the sun we failed. What it means to love someone without treating their steadiness as something you're entitled to spend. We told our son his grandfather's money was safe. We told him his brother needed it more. We told him, without ever using the words. That being the reliable one meant being the one who absorbed the damage without complaint. So he left. He took our granddaughter and built something solid and quiet, on the other side of the country. Under a name we didn't know, in a town we couldn't find. And the only reason we have any part of them back is that he decided to become the kind of father he never had the chance to learn from. One who shows his daughter that people can change, even when they don't deserve the opportunity. He didn't get that from us. He built it himself in spite of us. That is the thing I think about most, on the evenings when I sit in the kitchen with a photo of my granddaughter on the table, and the recipe card written in Nora's handwriting, somewhere in an Oregon kitchen, and I let myself feel the full weight of everything. We lost and everything we were given back anyway. Not because we earned it, because he chose it, because she asked him to. Because some people become generous, not from having received generosity, but from deciding that the cycle stops with them. We told our son to carry it quietly. So he did. And then when he was ready, he put it down.